weather. Unpredictable and unexpected. From blizzards to hurricanes, it's been a year of extremes. But what about the winter ahead?
As much as maybe 40 to 60 inches.
Plus, the technology that's changing forecasts.
We actually can track in near real time global precipitation to better understand the impacts from rain and snow of these nor'easter storms in our own backyard.
Then, cockpit confessions.
If you had ice forming on an airplane, you may not be able to do this or this because they're being jammed up by ice accumulation.
What pilots really have to face when flying through severe weather. A rare look behind the scenes. And we separate fact from fiction.
Allergies are around all year round.
The Fox 5 Weather Team brings you weather extremes. Here's Nick, Audrey, Mike, and Reagan.
Winter, love it or hate it, we all have to deal with it.
During the next 30 minutes, we'll break down the science behind the storms.
And we'll debunk some of the biggest weather myths of all time.
But first, the question we get asked the most. Just how bad will this winter be? Ready or not, here comes winter. As always, coming up with a long-term winter forecast provides many challenges based on various weather and climate phenomena that occur around the globe. To understand more about the tug-of-war between cold and warm air, you have to understand weather oscillations. Oscillation is a word a scientist uses when describing how the Earth's climate undergoes regular cyclical changes between weather patterns over long periods of time. The more common ones we look at each year are El Nino, La Nina, the PDO, the AO, and the NAO. El Nino and La Nina are probably the most commonly discussed phenomena which play a role in how the jet stream moves across North America. And El Nino occurs when sea surface temperatures across the equatorial latitude in the Pacific are warmer than average. This then tends to result in a stronger southern jet stream. Conversely, a La Nina pattern results from colder than average temperatures, fostering a stronger northern or polar jet stream. For this upcoming winter season, it appears likely we'll have neither, what I call La Nada, which means nothing, or neutral conditions. More on that later. Traveling north across the Pacific, we discover the PDO, or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. In the positive or warm phase, temperatures are warmer than average in the northeastern Pacific, with the opposite happening during the negative or cold phase. We now head up to the Arctic and the AO, or Arctic Oscillation, and its relationship to the polar vortex. When the Arctic Oscillation is in the positive phase, polar circulation is stronger, which forces cold air and storms to stay to the north. The negative phase results in a weaker jet stream and a weaker polar vortex, which can become fractured. Closer to home, we look at what's taking place over the Atlantic Ocean, where the North Atlantic Oscillation, or NAO, takes place. Here we analyze pressure difference from north to south across the ocean. In the negative phase, you have weaker low and high pressure in the eastern Atlantic, which can lead to a blocking pattern further west. The positive phase brings stronger low and high pressure, which allows for a more northern and west to east jet stream pattern. Another outlier in winter weather prediction is the extent of Siberian snow cover that builds during the fall months. With higher than average snow, colder air may ultimately seep across the North Pole and eventually invade the U.S. So let's go month by month. December, I think there'll be an occasional threat, but it won't be quite as cold, even though we've had a couple of cold blasts already in November. We get a little break from time to time in December. It gets active about the second week of January with more significant cold blasts coming in, but they may not be long lasting. They may just come in for 3 or 4 days or so. February, the coldest and snowiest month, and even March, I think we'll likely see some activity, maybe a break from the cold, but we'll get several storm threats coming up at that point as well. In the meantime, snowfall, the heaviest will be off to the north and west, as much as maybe 40 to 60 inches North Jersey on up into the Catskills region, about 30 to 35 inches across the city, and a little less as you moved into central New Jersey and along the coast, particularly because there'll be more mixing of rain and snow. That's always kind of hard to predict with coastal storms, but that's still a slightly above average forecast. We should average about 27 inches of snow in New York City. Temperatures will be slightly above average when we go through the entire months of December through March. Technology is always improving, and our friends at NASA are showing just how they use that. Here's Mike with that part of the story.
So joining me now is Dahlia Kirschbaum. She's a NASA scientist. And Dahlia, NASA, you guys have been doing some research for nearly 2 decades now on the weather here on Earth. Tell us a little bit about your research and its findings.
That's right. Well, recently NASA just released an unprecedented global data set of rain and snow around the world using a constellation, a grouping of satellites to look on average over our planet. And so what we can see is we get an average state of how things are changing over 20 years, but we can also look in real time to see how weather is moving in our own backyards.
Here in New York, we're about to go into our winter season and everybody gets a little concerned with what's going on. Are there any places that have indications that it's going to be an extreme winter for their regions, and in New York in particular?
One of the things that the NASA satellites do, this research, is to better understand nor'easters. And I think we can all relate in the DC and New York area to these strong nor'easters that come through in the winter. And by being able to look from the tropics all the way to the poles with satellites such as the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission, we actually can track in near real time global precipitation to better understand the impacts from rain and snow of these nor'easter storms in our own backyards.
Coming up,
Welcome to my world.
behind the scenes of a place few people get to see. Wow. Confessions from the cockpit.
So, here, let's make you comfortable here.
As pilots reveal what really goes on when traveling through severe weather.
This is awesome. You never get a look at what pilots see. This is, and we're not even in the air.
Then, myth or reality.
Your body loses heat from everywhere, so cover up head to toe.
5 of the most common winter weather myths debunked. When Weather Extremes comes right back.
Welcome back. Traveling this holiday season?
You know I'm good for it.
Yeah, it's true. Pack your bags and your patience.
I go on a mission to find out the role winter weather plays during flight delays and cancellations.
Captain Tony DeTore is the director of flight and chief pilot for American Airlines New York and Boston crew bases. He invited us inside a Boeing 777.
Oh,
Welcome to my world. Wow. So, here, let's make you comfortable here.
This is awesome. You never get a look at what pilots see.
Well, we see pretty much everything, and what we don't see way off in the horizon, our radar sees for us. We have radar that can scan out to 320 nautical miles, so we can have plenty of advance notice to what we're going to be facing as we progress forward, and again, make our plan to avoid any real nasty weather.
He's been flying for 39 years. You can imagine he's seen a storm or two.
All weather impacts the flight operation, especially here in the Northeast and what we call the Washington to Boston corridor. Busiest airspace in the world. When weather impacts usually any of the 3 cities, it impacts all of them.
So it's a ripple effect.
Only so many airplanes can be in the sky at one time. Add in weather, which is always moving, it becomes a dance between the airlines and the FAA air traffic controllers, which control takeoffs, landings, and help find alternate flight paths around severe weather. All of this can affect the flow of air traffic, reducing the number of flights in the sky.
Especially with snow, which we're getting into that season, is on the ground because that necessitates de-icing and making sure the airplanes are perfectly clean. That's where the delays come. That's where the weather really impacts the operation.
That takes us to American Airlines Command Center, in charge of running the day-to-day operations. It's a tower that overlooks all 27 gates at the American Airlines terminal at JFK, led by Bill Leonard.
We're coming into the high flying season and the winter weather. How does your job change with the weather that happens here in the Northeast?
It changes dramatically. When the weather comes in, depending on the time of the day, the type of precipitation, all that comes into a calculation on what type of operation we're going to run, and then we'll decide to either make a decision with IOC, which is our headquarters in Dallas.
It consists of a 1,400-person team of in-house meteorologists, dispatchers, flight planners, and aircraft maintenance. These teams meet to make major decisions, like reducing flights when weather comes into play.
Weather events coming in and out of this area, anything that is top of your mind that you get a little nervous about or a little apprehensive about?
Ice. You can operate in rain and you can operate in snow. You don't operate in ice.
This is where the Port Authority comes in. They own the airport, in charge of making sure all runways and taxiways are clear, clean, and safe.
After the Port Authority does, say, cleans one runway, they'll do a test with a vehicle, and they'll give us a braking action report, and that'll tell us if the braking action is good, fair, poor, or nil. Nil means you go to hit the brakes, like in your car if you're on ice, and the airplane would just slide. So nobody takes off and lands in nil conditions. That's against the regulations.
While that's happening, sometimes aircrafts must be de-iced before getting onto the runway. And this is why.
If you had ice forming on an airplane, you may not be able to do this or this because they're being jammed up by ice accumulation. So that's why the airplanes are treated with the various fluids that we use, and it's a multi-step process.
If there's ever a moment where there's a delay and the passengers are wondering why aren't we taking off?
As a captain sitting in the captain's seat, if I'm flying a flight, I'll try to be making PAs every 20 to 30 minutes, advising the passengers, just keeping them in the loop, reassuring them that safety is first. I'll be explaining to them how the air traffic system is being affected because of weather either here or in Florida or en route, and just ask them to be patient, and we will get them to their destination as soon as possible.
Still ahead, fact or fiction?
We have holidays, Thanksgiving, and that time of the year we actually consume more calories and don't realize it.
And later,
sometimes things do go a little crazy.
And when all else fails, we blame the computer models.
when this edition of Weather Extremes returns.
As a kid, you likely heard things like, wear a hat to stay warm.
Could your parents and grandparents have been fibbing all along?
Say it ain't so.
Oh, it's so. Here are 5 of the most common winter weather myths.
There are many myths about how cold weather affects your health, and we set out to find out the truth. Myth number 1. Allergies go away in the winter.
I've seen like a transition from the fall where I've been using my inhaler a lot. So yeah, it's been a little worse than last year.
Allergies are around all year round. People assume they're in the springtime because of pollen, but dust, mites, animal dander is around 24/7, 365 days a year.
Dr. Niket Sonpal says that allergy sufferers should consider using their medication throughout the year if they need it. If you're not sure, talk to your physician. Myth number 2. You don't need sunscreen in the winter.
People assume that because in the winter, the sun is quote-unquote further away, the rays don't get here as easily.
There's been a couple times where I've actually, I've gotten sunburnt from snowboarding.
It's very well known when you participate in winter sports that the sun, when it amplifies off of the ground or off of the snow that's surrounding, can actually cause sunburns. And so that's why a lot of winter athletes will wear sunscreen.
These myths often appear to be based on things that seem logically correct or on observations that appear to be cause and effect.
Like myth number 3. You gain weight in the winter because your body stores more fat.
You tend to crave comfort food and, eat a lot of bread and soups and stews and things like that, whereas in summer, I guess, you tend to eat more salads.
Did you know your body has the same metabolic rate as long as you're eating the same foods and burning the same amount of calories?
We found it's actually a social change. We have holidays, Thanksgiving, and that time of the year we actually consume more calories and don't realize it. Plus, we don't walk as much, and we exercise less because it's so cold outside.
Myth number 4. Drinking alcohol will keep you warm.
I would recommend a bourbon, some whiskey, sure, hot toddy, always a great choice.
Alcohol and spicy food gets the same sort of thinking. They think, well, it burns on the way in, it must be keeping me warm on the inside. But what alcohol does is it dilates your blood vessels. When your blood vessels dilate, they give off more heat. So in actuality, that temporary warmth you feel in your chest from that hot toddy will later cause you to lose more heat anyway.
And that brings us to our 5th and final myth. Does wearing a hat really keep you from losing body heat?
As a kid,
yes.
Mom always said, put a hat on your head because you lose all the heat through your head.
Your body loses heat from everywhere, so cover up head to toe.
Next.
Sometimes, if there's a huge, severe storm, the pilots have to get into an aircraft empty.
When the Fox 5 Weather Team and Weather Extremes returns.
welcome back. In more than 30 years of forecasting the weather here in New York, one thing I can certainly say is that weather can be unpredictable.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And I gotta say, you know, last year, in the middle of November, we had one situation. There was a storm that we had forecast, and it turned out to be much bigger than what was in. But that just happens sometimes.
I mean, look at the ingredients when we deal with a forecast here. So we have the Atlantic Ocean, we have New York City, we have the mountains to the northwest.
Yep.
We have Canada to the east.
Bringing the cold air.
Yeah, so a subtle wind change in any of those particular directions, and your forecast goes right out the window.
It's true, which is why we really need to understand things like oceanography of our area, the topography of our area. That all is things that contribute to what we can expect.
And it can make a difference in the time of the year. You know, your forecast can be wrong in the wintertime because of a wind change, and in the summertime, again, because of a wind change.
I think one of the things we have to put out there is just for folks to think about winter, what happens during the winter, how to get your car prepped for this and be ready for these situations, because sometimes things do go a little crazy.
And when all else fails, we blame the computer models. There you go. It wasn't our fault. It was the computer models.
You know, it's not an exact science.
Exactly.
Right?
So, Audrey, in your piece earlier, we learned lots of things. And one thing that I learned was about my hats, right? What to do with hats.
It helps, right? It does help. However, it doesn't really retain as much heat as one may think, right? We were told as kids, you know, always wear a hat, always wear a hood, keep your head covered. That's where you lose most of your body heat. But as I learned during the research, it's really only 9% of your body heat that gets released through your head. I know that's surprising, right?
Yes.
But you know, it's because we have these extremities of our ears and our nose. Those are the things that may feel the coldest first. So we always think that because we're wearing the hat, that actually helps to insulate. It does help, but however, when you're an adult, it really is all about the area of your body, meaning in mass, in size. So really, you need to cover from head to toe.
So my grandmother used to yell at me in Greek, you know, don't go out the door without your hat.
Right. So in the end, we should look like, what was his name, Ralphie in Christmas Story, where he's all wrapped up and bundled up. And
in some of the research, it does show that for children, right, proportionally, they actually do lose a little bit more heat because the size of their heads are more proportional to their bodies as opposed to adults, where we have more body than head, right? So that's why, as a child, you're always told to really bundle up your head, and then it stays with us as adults.
So Reagan, you know, as a pilot, I found your piece really interesting, right? Because it's, you know, I have to deal with these type of delays and trying to get around winter weather, etc. But I'm also really jealous that you were in the 777.
I know you are. I was waiting for the jealousy.
I wanted to be in the 777.
I was like, exactly, me too.
Several points of interest. One being, and I know that you were really going to be interested, Nick, just because you fly airplanes, so you know, is that when winter weather arrives, let's put it into terms for flights, when it arrives to airports, the Port Authority is in charge of all of the airports. So before an airplane can actually take off, the Port Authority has to plow and do what it needs, and then does a braking action report. And I didn't know that. Right?
Talk about how the braking,
See if there's ice on the runway.
Yes.
And if there is ice, how much ice can the plane still take off and successfully land? Because if not, you're going to have a plane that skids off the runway.
And they do it on a category of 5s, you know, out of 1 through 5. You know, 5 out of 5 is good. Wow. 1 out of 5 is
Yeah, so when you're in the airplane, you see the snow falling, I always get worried when they come down on
I do too, because we always have these stories where someone's skidding off the runway.
And it just happened.
And I guess, exactly. So, yeah, so now I understand.
So, yeah.
They do have a rating scale, and they're supposed to be interesting.
So when you see the Port Authority there with their trucks and plowing, they're not just
out there hanging out?
Not hanging out doing like a contest who's going to drive down the runway quick enough. And sometimes, if there's a huge, severe storm, the pilots have to get into an aircraft empty and take the aircraft out of here, and that happened in Superstorm Sandy.
And also de-icing. Right? Airplanes have to be de-iced before they can fly.
Yes.
And when a plane gets de-iced, it has 30 minutes.
That's what I wanted to ask you about, because the pilot was saying that there is a certain amount of time, and every airline has its equations and its FAA regulations.
Correct, and it's usually about 30 minutes. So when you get de-iced, you have 30 minutes to get in the air, otherwise you got to get de-iced again.
And go back to the taxiway.
That happened to me, actually, on that last storm last November.
No.
And we had to de-ice again. But we did get out before they shut the airport down, and then everybody else was mad at me.
Is this the one in Houston?
This is the one. Actually, no, that was actually a tropical storm.
Tell us more, Mike.
I know. Anytime there's nasty weather coming to town, I'm out of here.
All right, then we know when you're gone.
Yeah.
All right.
And you know
Watch
who gets,
out.
and that means that we get stuck with handling the storm.
I get the phone call to come in.
It's the Mike Woods effect. That does it for this edition of Weather Extremes.
And don't forget, you can get up-to-the-minute forecasts on our Fox 5 weather app.
And of course, we'll see you every morning, noon, and night.
And don't forget weekends, too.
No. For Mike, Audrey, and Reagan, I'm Nick Gregory. Get the most accurate forecast this winter right here on Fox 5.